que van a tocar el fin de semana, el sábado en el Get Out Festival. Y les vamos a hacer unas cuantas preguntas para que los conozcamos un poco más, nos cuenten un poco de su carrera, sus inicios y todas las cosas que han pasado para llegar a este punto de su carrera. Well, welcome and thank you for your time and your kindness to be part of the Get Talk. One quick, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
The first question, of course, is tell me about how you started and what made you decide to pursue this DJ career and producer career.
So I studied music. I knew when I was a kid already, when I was 12, 13 years old, I already knew that I was going to pursue a music career. I wasn't sure if I was going to be a DJ or a musician, but at that time I was really into jazz music, so I studied jazz at the conservatory. And in Berlin, actually, and Berlin obviously is kind of like the center of electronic music, maybe in the world, the capital of electronic music, maybe. So I was exposed to very creative electronic music in Berlin, going out on the weekends and learning, and I got a taste of that. And then basically, while I was still in the conservatory, I started putting together a studio and producing tracks. Started a label in 2007, so 12 years ago, and put out the first record in 2008. And I just kind of took my record under my arm and went to the club and gave it to Margaret Daiges at that time and Ricardo Villalobos, and they played my tracks. I was not really a DJ or whatever, I was more of a producer, right? So I just gave them my music and they started playing the music, and then I thought, oh, maybe I can actually make a job out of this, and maybe this can become more serious. It takes a few years, obviously, to get to a point where you can live from that, and by maybe 2012 I was pursuing a professional DJ career. So that's maybe five years after started to put out music, to release music. And in my case it was really going through the productions and through the releasing records and then playing sets, obviously DJing locally, but then also started in Europe, Switzerland, Spain, first time to Ibiza, these kind of things. But yeah, it always takes a few years to get it going, right? So that was kind of my story. From 2012 on until now, I'm doing this professionally.
Please.
And so for me, in some ways, at the beginning of when I started, I was actually more in the band scene rather than electronic music.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm honest, I wasn't actually very into electronic music for quite a long time until it was about kind of 19, and the first time I went to Fabric and saw a bunch of artists play there. And for me, it was the first realization that watching a concert being played in this way against the way you would normally see a band, it felt a lot more important and a lot more engaging and modern. And so for me, that was the one turning point when I kind of became slightly obsessed with it. But originally, actually, the way I became a DJ in some ways was when I was 18, I actually really wanted to buy an old Mini Cooper on eBay for 230 quid. And Alex actually told my mum that he doesn't want that, he wants a pair of decks. And so at that time, I wanted to be a mechanic actually, originally. And so from that moment, like, as soon as I started playing on those, I was very dyslexic at school, so in some ways I found school quite difficult, but I always had music and was always doing music, and he was like, you should be doing that. And so he pushed my mum to get me a set of decks the first time, so as soon as I started doing that, I became very, very obsessed with it. And so then we had some nice pieces of advice from other DJs that we'd go and see and ask about music production and sound engineering. I then did a degree in music production and sound engineering because I was like, how do you become a DJ? I want to learn how to make the music. And so I did a degree in that at the ACM in Guildford, which is kind of my hometown in England, which was, it's an incredible school and a really, really amazing place to work. And then from there, from one piece of advice from someone said, if you can just try and wait as long as you physically can with your music to try and develop it to the point where you feel like the music is actually competing with the people that your main influences, or like just being at a level that can be enjoyed in the same way as their music, then when you decide to release it, there'll be traction. Because when it comes, if the music comes out at the point where it's above a certain level, no matter what, DJs are looking for music all the time. And whether or not you promote it or anything, if the music is really good, people will buy it. And I think for us, so we waited for 9 years before we released our first Flash as a Rat, me and Alex. And at the time as well, we had friends, also like Archie Hamilton was like a good friend of ours at the time, and he was saying, you know, guys, put these out. But we really felt that it hadn't quite hit the point we wanted. And so the lovely feeling with the first Flash as a Rat was then we felt like this is maybe
you were ready.
Yeah, this is maybe the one. And actually we took it to this record store in London called Christina Records, which now they've just Christina.
I remember Christina. Yeah.
Exactly. And the most terrifying moment for any person is to have your music being played in the shop.
Yeah.
And so we took a test pressing of it. And the reason we actually called it Flash as a Rat was we kind of made the label to hope that if it went badly, we could just kill it. Because stupid name, we can get rid of it afterwards. And we went in and we played it to Jimmy Asquith, who's part of now runs Lobster Theremin, but he was working at Christina Records at the time. And he put it on the system and said, well, you know, how many have you got? And we said 300. And he kind of just took them there and then, which was a lovely feeling. But then the main point where things started actually happening was when we decided to move to Berlin, because actually we had no idea where the records were being sold. We knew they were being sold, but we didn't know where. And I think the one thing when we decided to move to Berlin, which is about 3 or 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, we suddenly realized that like a lot of our idols had been playing the music, and then we got kind of lucky because there was already a slight introduction from that music when we got there. And I mean, I think things really kicked off when I got to Berlin.
So, what do you consider that is the inflection point in your career? All the artists start like local DJs, you know, playing small clubs in their town, and then something happened, and you start playing all around the world. Like, for example, now this weekend you're gonna play it in Lima on a festival, like many miles away from home.
Yeah.
Yeah. The turning part, I think it's. I like to think it's a transition, and not one particular event. I think it's maybe a string of events that lead to a functioning career. Just like many complicated things, there's not one simple solution. It's not like you do this and then you're gonna have a career, and then you're gonna be fine. I think you have to always work very hard and kind of like, as Digby was saying, I think when other people play your music, that is an important turning point.
Definitely an important point.
That is a very important turning point as a producer to make a career as a producer, and also as a DJ to get booked. People know you from the music, but obviously also just shows, right? Like you have to play good shows. You have to be engaging with the crowd. And I think that's a transition that's, in my case anyways, I like to think that it's a constant growing. I like to learn still every day. You go out there and you try to give your best, and this is, I think, the way a career grows organically, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when we were living in London, the only way that we thought that actually we could even get a gig was by throwing a party. So we used to run a night at a place called Plastic People in Shoreditch, which sadly closed down a few times and got moved around to quite a few different places. But the one thing that allowed us to do, they gave us a very nice chance. This person, Shah, who's a wonderful you know, absolutely wonderful human being, gave us the opportunity to put minimal music in their club. And that club originally comes from bass music and kind of English, also grime and other things, kind of very, very British. And in some ways, minimal music is also a bit more European. And at that time, it was a very, very good learning point because of the fact of the DJs we were booking. We had, you know, Rod had, in some ways before, you know, this is a...
You booked Rod had?
This is like a 230 capacity club. You know, we booked Rod had. I think we were one of the first people to bring DJ Stingray to London.
Awesome.
And Caban, DJ Sprinkles, like a lot of people that we really felt were important selectors. But the thing of trying to like learn to warm up in those scenarios with such different acts and artists was, I think that was more almost the crucial point for us to be able to warm up for someone like DJ Stingray and then Caban, you know, a few weeks after. And I think that was the real, in some ways, that kind of experience, you can't, you know, there is nothing like it. But I think when the point that it actually kind of things started taking off was the move to Berlin. Even though before I was like, I don't want to move to Berlin. If I move there, I'll like never be able to leave. And like, I'd heard from a lot of people as well that obviously because the price of living is a little bit lower, that you might have a great time, but you might also like be kind of stuck afterwards.
Do you think that in these days you need to produce in order to have a successful DJ career, or?
I think nowadays the one thing which I think in the scene, especially in somewhere like Berlin at the moment, which is very positive, is people are really, really researching music again, but like old music, stuff that's coming out as well, but people are a lot more knowledgeable in some way, like very, very interested in digging and looking for records. And I think in every way that's positive. And in some ways that's also kind of pushing a slightly different generation of artists, because you can just, I think, kind of be a DJ. The only thing which I think lacks is international pull in some ways. If you're not producing, I think it's difficult for people to grasp who you are, what your thing is. And I think if you produce music, it's a lot more far-reaching.
To put your name outside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if people are buying your music, then immediately they have something from you and they can connect with you. And that's a lot more difficult, I think, if you don't produce. But you can definitely nowadays, against any other point, I almost think it's the closest time, almost like the past, where you could just be a DJ because of your selection and your records.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's necessary to make music to build a career anymore. And that's probably changed over the years. I think maybe back in the days it was very important to be making music, and artists, like most known artists, were producers, right? Like they're known for the records. But I don't think that's necessary anymore. I'm not judging that. I think it depends on what kind of career you want to build also, right? Like, and what it's based on. I think for me in particular, my personal story was always connected to making music. Like I get a lot of joy, and for me I think in music, my brain works like that.
So you consider yourself more a producer than a DJ, or it's 50-50?
I think I don't like drawing the line. I don't like separating that very much. I think
you do both.
Yeah, you can really do both. I get this question a lot in interviews where people are like, are you more of a producer? Are you more of a DJ? I consider myself a good DJ, but I also produce, and vice versa. I think you can do both, really. But the relationship between producing and DJing is not a one-way street. It can be both. It's a two-way street. Or if you're just DJing, you just DJ. I think in the modern days that's possible.
I think the one thing to kind of reference though that's important is I think it's wonderful if people are collecting records and digging for all this amazing music, but in some ways, unless you're contributing to what's going on, I think it's important if you decide that this is what you want to do with your life, that you become part of it. And the only way really you can become part of it as an artist or a DJ is by in some way giving something back. And I think the way you do that is with the music that you make. And I think people can become comfortable in the idea of just DJing, and that's absolutely fine. But I remember actually Ricardo was the first person who said it to me. and Alex when we went up to him, and it was at the time when the Romanians were kind of breaking through, but they weren't so well known, and we were at an after party in London, and we went up to Ricardo, and there was all this music that no one had access to at that time. Absolutely no one had access to, and you just never heard anything like it. And we said, you know, this is incredible. Should we be keeping our music so that when we play a set, it's completely original to us, or should we be releasing it?
Yeah.
Because these guys have got all this music and they're not releasing it.
For
and it's
themselves.
yeah, for them, which was an incredible thing in some ways, because you just never heard anything like it. And we asked him that thing.
It makes it automatically special, right?
Yeah, and I think the one thing he said was, so wait, you haven't released a record yet? And I was like, well, no. And he was like, okay, well, you have no idea what, like, until you're contributing, there's no point having this conversation. I think that's a very good point.
I want to ask you guys, how do you prepare yourself for a tour or for a local gig? Do you prepare a playlist?
Sleep a lot. What? Sweep? Sleep.
No, but you in your head you start making like a playlist for a party, or you just show yourself and okay, let's see what
I think
happened.
the one thing that's if you've been to somewhere before, I always kind of like the idea of being able to pack basically it will be going through your records and thinking about maybe the time you're playing, maybe the kind of crowd that might be there. And if you've been to the club, you can maybe understand the context that you'll be playing in. If you've never been there, it can be a little bit more difficult. But I think it's more about just trying to create a selection that you really feel is kind of right for that, as well as being from you. Does that make sense?
Considering, for example,
Yeah.
a DJ set for a small club and a DJ set for a big festival, how does it compromise your sound? How do you include your original tracks in that kind of environment?
I think sometimes I might not, depending on what it is. I mean, I make a lot of edits to play, and I'll normally play quite a few of those in some ways. And that can be cuts of records where we all have it, where you look for a great track and it's incredible for 3 minutes, and there's a point where suddenly it goes and it sucks. And so then, you know, doing little cuts of those kind of records to create something that's different, or adding other elements, or doing almost a remix of that track just for you to play. I think I would always play those in the sets, but sometimes I won't play originals. I think it's the most important thing at the end of the day is it's a party, like, and in some ways, yes, you're there to play as you, and you should always play as you, but it's a party. Like, it's got to go off. It's got to be fun. Like, you've got to kind of do your job in some ways.
Yeah.
You know?
I think disc jockey, the word disc jockey, DJ, already suggests that you're juggling with music, that you have a range of music, and depending on the situation that's in front of you, the room you're in, the time and space where you are, you do something appropriate with the music that you have. So packing your record box is kind of like taking all these little different pieces and putting them together for all kinds of different environments. So you're packing this track for a big room, but you're also packing tracks for a smaller room. Specifically when you go on tour and you play 6 shows, right? You go and you play very different shows. So the art form is to stay flexible as a DJ, in my opinion, to stay flexible and pack a record bag that's flexible enough to do both, right? Big rooms, small rooms, outside, festivals, clubs, and also different kinds of crowds. Like reading the crowd and feeling the vibe, what's in front of you is really key for, I think, being a successful or being a good DJ. You can't just do your thing only. I think it's a party. You're dealing with the people. It's like a party is only as good as the crowd is. You know, it's like it's not just a one-man show.
It's not only about you.
It's not about me.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Yeah. It's not about the DJ, and that's a beautiful thing with what Digby was saying. It's really an inclusive thing. A party is like everyone is part of the situation there. Everyone in the room is playing, basically. Like we're all playing together.
It's a beautiful thing when you connect with
Yes.
all.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just one track that makes it go
Exactly.
off.
Yeah.
But I think also, as in going back to also what you were saying about what do you do to prepare, I think the most important thing is to try prepare what you can, but also be completely flexible. As you were saying, to choose to change at any moment. I don't think either of us would write from, track 1 to track 10. There might be like, I know a track goes really well into another track, and maybe I'll put those two vinyls next to each other because I'm like, it's a safe bet. That will run, and I know where that goes. But you'd never plan. In a way, at the beginning, I did try and plan a little bit, but every single time I did, it was wrong for the room. So, like, I think that you have to.
Yeah, you can't
plan
a situation.
You have to adapt.
I know, but I have heard a few DJs who play exactly the same set. And I mean, when you have like 3 festivals in 1 week and they prepare the same set,
I hope it's good.
If it's a killer set, yeah. That's also the difference of playing live, in my opinion. Like, if you're also performing live, if you do live sets, which I sometimes do, not as often as DJing, that's a very different thing. You're playing your show, you're playing your live set. Whereas when you DJ, you're playing with the people. You're always dealing with the situation there. If you play live, you have more your content, right? Your material.
This is not your first time in South America, or yes, no. And what's your, if you compare the scenes from here to Europe or another part of the world, do you think it's the same, it's different? What do you like?
I mean, for me, I had a really fantastic, I had such a good time in Uruguay for this festival, Legends Festival, and I think that, whether or not that's a good example of the kind of scene here, I have no idea, because I mean that's kind of mainly the only real place that I've played in kind of South America. But that show was incredible, and the people were so receptive, and it was just a really, really special show. So, I mean, I haven't played so much South America. You'd be a better kind of person to ask about that, but
yeah, I've played. Yes, I have a feeling that in South America there's a lot of enthusiasm. It's a younger scene. Young people are very interested, which is always a very good sign. It's maybe not as big. Probably the scene is smaller than in Europe, but that doesn't necessarily matter. I think it's very nice to see the enthusiasm of people that like really follow you and they really get into it. Yeah, it's a smaller, younger scene, but maybe a bit more enthusiasm actually than, let's say, compared to a city like Berlin, where it's always been like that. You can even see it how people dance.
They're more used to.
They're more used to it, yeah. And here it's something a bit more special. To have events like this, a festival like this, it doesn't happen all the time. So if it happens, it's really amazing. Like the people really go for it and engage in it. So I think that's a very good thing. I think that's very beautiful to say. Very beautiful to see that a young scene is growing like that. And you need promoters to throw the parties, right?
For sure.
And that's work. But. Yeah.
Have you ever made a party by yourself?
Yeah, we did label parties. It was usually through the label. I'm running a label with a partner, and we did parties at a club in Berlin. And I have a residency, so I'm a resident in Berlin at the Club de Visionaire in Hoppetos for I think 10 years now, almost. I've been playing there regularly, all the time. But I have a lot of respect for the work of a promoter. I know there's so much work. And organizing, you have to be really organized, and without the promoters, without the people, all this would not be possible, right? So, yeah.
You have been here, both of you, more than 5 years, so you have been seeing how everything changing, evolving, like really fast. When you started, and how you feel when you start making this, and now you feel that change, like everything is a little bit different.
I mean
social media and all that.
Of course, that's a factor. I mean, the one thing I think, no matter what, it was probably always changing too. I mean, obviously there's the fact of things like social media, which are important, however you look at it. Annoying in some ways, annoyingly, but I think the thing which I find interesting is more just how sound-wise things seem to evolve, or what people seem to become tuned in on. I mean, the one thing, Berlin's a pretty kind of ripping example of a place where in some ways, a lot of people are looking for a similar thing in the racks when they're looking for music, and there's definitely like a kind of idea of almost like a record selector sound, or like things that would normally people are kind of looking for together. And I mean, the one thing, I think that's a positive thing because people are now kind of much more in tune with kind of music history in those parts. But I think the thing I'm excited or interested in or excited about at the moment is trying to have just a slightly wider range of what you're trying to find and look for, and actually more trying to have a sound across a lot of different genres. Well, not necessarily, again, I say genres, it can be a lot of different things, but still having continuity through it. And I think that isn't explored enough, and I think people can become a little bit safe or a bit worried to push the boat too far so that they can be judged in some ways. I think you just kind of, in some ways, have to... It's nice when people come back to you and things are going well for you, you obviously become more confident. But at the beginning, if you aren't known for what you maybe do, even if you want to be bold, someone can maybe try and kind of be critical of what you're doing, actually, rather than being open enough to see where it's going. And I think the most important thing, which I think people are doing more now than they were, is being a little bit more bold. And I think that's a very positive thing.
Yeah, specifically in the last maybe two years, like in the very recent change, there's more boldness, more risk-taking again. But I think, just like in many scenes, there's cycles. Like, there's fashion that kind of come back. You know, there was the minimal time, and then there's techno from the 90s, and then it changed into a different sound. So it's constantly evolving, as Digby's saying. What I think is more particular in the last few years is that the range has maybe opened a little bit. Like, there's you don't have to only play one sound. You know, it's like back in the day, an artist would be known because of minimal sound or because he was a techno artist. Now I think you're able to do both or more at the same time, and you're not only known for one niche, if that makes any sense.
For example, yesterday that you opened for
Richie,
for sure is going to be totally different than you're going to play on Saturday.
Yeah, so I'm going to play differently on Saturday, and it's definitely different than playing at Hoppetos in Berlin, you know. So again, I think DJing is about staying flexible and being able to do different things. That I like. There's a few things that I think some changes are not only positive. I think we have to also stay critical when it comes to social media. You brought up social media. I think it's a point that that matters. I think basing a career or basing a thing that's a human interaction with a screen is kind of wrong. You know, like, people are now too much on their phones in the club. The phones go up all the time. I think rather than enjoying the moment, people are enjoying it through Instagram stories or through the internet. And I love innovation, and I'm big into technology, and I think there's a lot of positive things, but we have to stay critical or just smart about how we engage in a human nature, because in the end, a party is about putting a bunch of people in a room having a good time,
well, in Berlin
rather than putting people in front of their phones.
In Berlin, it's mostly banned in most of the
clubs. So I think that's finally, like, it's happening, right? And there's some good change happening in that regard. But yeah, it doesn't make sense to go to a party and look at your phone, right? You can do that at home.
What's your position about producing? Do you guys use software, hardware? What's your opinion for the people who use only software and only?
There's no right way at all. Like, if someone says it has to be analog, it has to be what it's like. If you have a fantastic idea, it's a fantastic idea. Whether it's software, it might not sound as good as an analog piece of equipment doing that, but like, if it's a great track, it's a great track. Like, and I think the combination is kind of the key. I think, like, the access now to access to music writing software is kind of a much higher, like, MIDI interfaces for the ability to come up with melodic lines that you could never have played, you know, 5 years ago. Like, if we were trying to make a track like that, you had to play it. Where now you can...
The tools are getting better and advanced.
But I think the tools to also, like, create quite complex song structures that you could never have made before. I think that part in software is incredible. But for me, I'm lucky to be in the situation that I have a kind of nice studio in Berlin where it's pretty much almost fully hardware. But the only way that really came about was from, I kind of work as a mix engineer for more band music as well. And the kind of just slowly building that up and building it up. But again, with all of this stuff, contrast in the track itself can almost be key. Like having a sound in some ways that is completely mundane and boring to show how beautiful the texture of something else is can be really effective. So I think there is no right way. I mean, obviously in some ways the most important thing is to be able to hear the best you can, so kind of hear what you're able to do. I mean, it sounds silly, but like it's actually quite hard to be able to hear actually how it sounds.
Monitoring,
monitoring and
is
the
really
room and
important.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any right way. I think the most important thing is to be thinking about what the track is meant to convey and focus on that.
I also think that, as you were saying, the VSTs now and the possibilities to manage audio.
Yeah.
You record something and you can completely transform it into something else.
Yeah.
With the plugins.
Completely.
It's a great opportunity and possibility, but I think what is important is that you're creative, that you're able to be creative. So if I have a synthesizer in front of me, again, it's different than having a screen in front of me. So a synthesizer you can touch, you can play, you can tweak. So the likelihood of something special coming out, in my case anyways, is better than making music with a mouse.
So you put it the humanize it.
Yeah. So and again, this is not better or worse. Everyone's creativity is different. In my case, it was important to be able to express myself, and that works best for me with having something I can touch, like an instrument, actually. So I know so the conversation analog versus digital or software versus hardware is. There's no better or worse.
There are so many factors.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you can make a track
you can make
analog
a great
that sounds shit.
Yeah,
or like you
exactly.
can make a track digitally and
Digital
it sounds shit too.
yeah.
Or it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of producers who are extremely only use analog and hardware and they don't like even touch.
Yeah.
But that's fine. That,
Yeah.
like, if that works, if it works, then that's great. I mean, like in some ways, I'm probably almost one of those. Like pretty much every piece of audio is analog.
Yeah.
But if I want to come up with something or try to come up with something that like, I mean, digital software is incredibly complex, and like using modular synthesizers is a really fun, innovative way of stuff you couldn't have necessarily been able to generate or thought of yourself. But then to be able to complement that with real musicality, like nowadays it's becoming easier and easier.
And also the learning factor, like modular systems and modular synthesis in particular, I think, kind of penetrates your brain. You have to really think what you're doing. It's like it's not plug and play. It's a learning curve. You're constantly patching something up. It's like you got to think about it, and you maybe have a little bit of a plan in your head before you do the patch. So. I like that because over the span of 10 years, I have learned so much by diving into modular synthesis in particular, because you're learning what's actually going on. You're building your own synthesizer rather than launching a plugin and pressing a button, then something comes out.
You design your own sound from scratch.
You start from scratch. It's like having a white piece of paper, and now what do you do? So creativity, in my case anyways, or in I guess we're kind of alike in this, has something to do with the brain, right? Like how we build ideas, and that works best in my case when you understand what's going on under the hood and not just not to have a
preset.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's much more yours if you're coming up with it. You know, I think
way more.
I think you're making, as you're talking about, it's like you're trying to come up with something that you think is
that's
right
yours.
for it. You're not just going through things and going, oh, that's quite cool, I'll use that.
Yeah.
Well, I have going back to DJ sets. For us, for sure, music is the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
But how much importance you gave to screens, visuals, deco, special effects, or you think if the music is good, you just need the music?
Honestly, a nice dark room and the music I'm happy with.
Yeah. What do you think?
It depends, I think. I like good productions, and I'm a fan of visuals in particular. I like this. I remember going out in Berlin as a teenager, and in every club there would be a VJ. I like that aspect, and yeah, I mean, obviously there's the classic box, dark room, just music, good speakers, good sound. But I have respect for good productions, and again, I think it depends on the situation. Like if you're in Berlin, and if you want to go out for a dark club night, you shouldn't be having all like a huge light production there. But then again, I think a festival, for example, an outside festival is a different story. So I think there's two. It depends, right? Like.
Or you think it also depends of the sound?
I think it can add to the experience.
Techno is
The
different.
experience, exactly. Techno is obviously a different experience than, let's say, an outdoor festival by a lake in Portugal, right?
Yeah.
We played, for example, at one of my favorite festivals is the Waking Life Festival in Portugal. The production and the love of detail they put into this, like they go there for months and basically build a world out of wood and structures, and it's beautiful. It's amazing how much love is going into the production of a festival like that. So they don't just put speakers on the beach and that's the party. They really put a lot of love and detail into building things and decoration and lights. There were lights in the trees, and it's very special. Houghton Festival is another example where art is actually coming in, right? Like where artists are coming in and taking part of building an experience. So I think it depends. If you go to a club night in Berlin, I don't need much, literally. Like, not many lights, couple lights, and a very good sound system, and that's it. But if you go to a festival, it's a different story, I think.
Okay. And well, last question, more than question, is you as a producer and as a DJ, what do you can tell the people, that Peruvian artists or Latin American artists that want to pursue this career, but what do they need to really go forward? Like just start producing or just taking gigs?
I think the piece of advice that I was given, which I think was the best piece of advice it was actually from Nick Curley in Ibiza. He was the one who just said, just wait as long as you physically can to release your first record. And that is the patience part. I mean, at the end of the day, if you want to do
patience.
Patience. If you want to do this, you've also got to realize, I think, that it depends what aspect you want of it, but if you actually want to be kind of worth what I think people should be trying to do or trying to be part of that, it's kind of full dedication. It's like the only thing you're choosing to do, And I think just pushing, basically just trying to work as much as you can on one thing. I don't think it's also going to be fast. You're definitely going to go through bumps where it gets worse and it gets better, and you have no idea if you're getting better or if you're getting worse. You really have no idea what you're doing. Yeah. But the point is, I think you have to basically realize that if you dedicate your life to it, that's what you do. But it's from every single part of your life.
It's hard, for sure. Like building a career it's ups and downs. It's not a straight line. That's for sure. So what's the piece of advice? Stay at it. Stay comfortable. Stay positive. Don't give up on yourself. It sounds cheesy. It sounds maybe cheesy, but it's really what matters. Like trust in what you're doing is right. Keep working. And I guess obviously networking, like working internationally, meeting people and exchanging tracks, sending tracks to labels, getting feedback, etc. is important. But yeah, work hard and trust yourself and don't give up. 5 years is nothing. And I was in the position where I was I want everything now, tomorrow. And I think this is a notion that everyone knows here in this room. We're all very impatient. If we want something, we want it now. Particularly now, and we're living in a time where everything is very instant. Building a career is not an instant thing. In my opinion, it doesn't happen overnight. In some cases, it does. Some people get successful very quickly. But that's also very hard then. Then you're carrying a lot of weight on your shoulders as well. So I think, trusting yourself and building a foundation to carry a career is important. Like trust yourself, work hard, and then over time things will come to you, I think.
And I think one other thing, which I'm sure we both agree, is just more, you just have to listen to so much music.
Yeah, listen to a lot
just
of
look
music.
and just keep looking for stuff. Listen to everything.
Yeah.
Like
Educate yourself.
Yeah.
Learn what the other people are doing. Learning from other people. Yeah.
Bueno, gracias. Un aplauso para Digby and de Balta. El que quiera hacer una pregunta, levante la mano, y si es en castellano normal, la podemos traducir, no hay ningún problema.
So you guys mentioned like there's this point where you're like a clubber, I guess, and then you go to DJing. So can you ever like go back to just being a clubber? Do you ever wish like
I still am.
Do you still ever? That's my question. Do you
Yeah.
ever feel you can keep doing it? Is it always there?
For
Is it
sure.
always
Yeah.
there?
I mean,
Yeah, we're still ravers.
we just kind of, that's what we do on the weekends.
It doesn't stop.
Okay, so basically it was that, and just asking, in Peru especially, there's like this arguing between minimal music, techno music, tech house music, and you have to
Yeah.
label everything. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's still like an argument over there. Do you guys keep like trashing each other's music? I guess
Doesn't happen
you
at
guys,
all.
you don't do it, but do you witness like the scene still doing it in Europe like they do it here, I guess?
I think like
I don't pay attention to that. No.
I think one thing that you'll naturally see is maybe on a press side, people would try and pigeonhole stuff because it's easy.
Yeah, it's easy to talk shit.
It's easy. It's also, you know, it's really easy to, if you can put something in a camp, you can talk about it in a specific way. But I think the nice thing, which hopefully will infiltrate from here, if that's the way it is at the moment here, is that the more open people become and the more they realize, I think, that people now have a much broader range in how they play, I think it will become more and more common that people aren't specifically thinking of someone as, oh, this guy plays minimal, this guy makes techno, or whatever. It's just like, he's a great DJ, you know, hopefully.
Plays good
Like,
or he doesn't.
hopefully. Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
What would you say? Do you have to press? Okay. Hey, what would you say are your greatest inspirations when making music? And when you're blocked, where do you turn to? Like, what do you do? Inspiration.
Inspiration. It's actually, I have a lot of inspiration outside of music. So I just became a father, for example. So my kid is actually quite inspiring. So seeing a child grow can be a very inspiring thing. So often I go into the studio with images of either nature or things that are not necessarily music, and then try to write music around it. So, or feelings or something. I think that can be a source of inspiration. Right now, I think it also changes over time. Like inspiration, 10 years ago, I had different inspirations than today. I also to listen to some pretty shitty music when I was when I was 15 years old, but we don't need to go there. Right now, I'm interested in actually classic music again and film music, scoring music. I'm a big fan of Johan Johansson or Hans Zimmer. I think it's pretty amazing what these composers are doing, and I draw a lot of inspiration. Alessandro Cortini, his new album is fantastic in my opinion. So I get a lot of inspiration from artists that are not necessarily techno artists, if that makes any sense, and then try to integrate it. Yeah.
I think for me, I mean, the night I was talking about at Fabric, the first time when I was like, shit, like dance music's cool, I kind of want to do this. It was when Ricardo Villalobos was playing, and obviously he's an inspiration as like just as an artist in general. He's an incredible artist, so for me he's a big inspiration. I think the one problem about thinking of the idea of inspiration is weirdly, I have kind of a weird outlook on how inspiration is. I think like no matter what, you should just be there on the day working, whether or not you're inspired or you're not inspired.
Or when you're blocked.
If you're just working, something eventually comes that inspires you that you're making. And you can't be like, you find a lot of people as well, maybe people who get a little bit more comfortable, who've been playing a lot and doing stuff. It's like, oh, you know, I'm not really sure if like, I'm really in the mood to make music. I'm not feeling inspired. It's like, it's bullshit. Like,
just go.
Get in the studio. Like, at the end of the day, whether you're inspired or not, if you're turning up and you're working, something will come.
Something will come, yeah. It's true.
Thank you.
Hi guys. How did you discover your own sound? How was the process?
I think it's a very natural process. Digby was saying something that ties in with your question, I think, very much. It takes time to develop a sound. So again, it's not like you wake up in the morning and you have your sound. So he was saying, wait as long as possible, learn as much as possible before releasing something. That's kind of tying in what you're asking. I think building a sound is, again, a process over time. You need patience for that. And then at some point, maybe you're reaching a level where you're like, this sounds like me, you know, rather than this sounds like the sample pack that I used or the drum machine that I used, or, you know, this is supposed to sound like you. Maybe your processing changes, your way of producing maybe changes over time. So being patient in the studio, giving yourself a couple of years to develop the sound and being patient is a key, I think. And also, when it comes to sound, there's another thing I want to say. I think sounds can also change, and again, it's also a range. Like when sometimes I make more techno tracks, and other times it's more minimal or ambient. I just put out an ambient record this year. So I think it's okay to have different sounds also, as long as there's a bit of a red line that goes through all of your productions, if that makes any sense. So there's not necessarily one sound. I don't want to be put in one box either. You know, like sometimes I'm going to have a fucking, you know, really banging techno banger, and at other times I want something very organic. As long as you can tell that there's Dewalta in there, as long as I can tell that it's in there, I'm happy. So I guess that's maybe what you mean with sound.
I think I agree with everything you're saying with it. I think the one thing, I think to focus directly on the idea of your sound is good, but I don't think you can really hear your own sound.
It comes naturally. Yeah.
I mean, basically, try copy the stuff you like the best, but that's organic to you, and where you fall short, that will be your sound. Where you can't actually create the thing that you want it to be. In some ways, I think those fallings are in some way your, like, what becomes you. Well, I think that did for us anyway.
Yeah, it comes naturally. I think like it's after a while, your tracks sound a certain way, and then that's your sound, I guess. Yeah.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Thank you. First of all, nowadays, how important do you think is the role of a label in what you do?
Very important, a label.
The role of the label nowadays.
I think at the end of the day, it's like, if you look at all the people who are putting out vinyl records, like, no one's really making any money. Everyone does it because they like it. Like, it's done because we all love it. And I think the important point for a label is to be looking for what is interesting and being open to listening to new music. And I think labels are still almost one of the absolute top points in some ways. I mean, I think there's more new labels at the moment than I've like ever seen. I mean, I'm not sure about you, but it's like there are new labels coming out all the time, and people who seem to really want to invest their own money into something that they believe in. And I think it's incredibly important.
Yeah. I think that actually just in the recent times, like literally within the last 3 years, things have shifted a little bit. Like the label boom was happening maybe 10 years ago. It was starting, literally everyone had their own label because it was possible. But I think now there's a shift a little bit in the last few years, which I think can be addressed and is good, that you can, like with Bandcamp, for example, you can put out your music without having a label. And I think that's a great opportunity. We don't need more labels, actually. If you'd ask me, you know, it's like there's like everyone has their label, and it's almost a little too much. Then labels die and they stop, and it's fun. It's nice to have that diversity. But as a young artist, when you're making music, it's also okay to not do your label and just put the music maybe on Bandcamp or send it to labels that you like, that you look up to, where you're like, wow, I can see myself on this label. And
but you also, as you say, it's like you don't really need a label to give you the next thing. It's like if you really believe your music is good, you could put it out yourself, and it will do just as well as being on another label if it's a great track. Almost people are looking for the thing. They're like, I don't know what this is. Like, I don't know where it's coming from, and it's almost more desirable in some ways. I mean, for a lot of people, I would normally say, because the only reason I say start a label to release it would just be if it was coming out on record, but digitally, that's exactly the thing. It
if you don't
come straight out.
Yeah,
it doesn't need a label, but like the point is contribute, put music out, and like actually be part of the thing, rather than, there's definitely a lot of people I think who would much rather kind of hide behind being like, I don't like that, I don't like this, but until you're also part of it, in some ways it's kind of a pointless opinion, you know.
There's also the thing, when you send music to a label, you get feedback, you're kind of measuring yourself with what's already out there, rather than just saying like, oh, I'm going to do my label and put it out, right? It's kind of good to compare, not compare yourself, but, you know, to see where you stand compared to other artists. And I think that's important to learn from other artists. So sending music to labels I think is a good thing also. Sure, building a label is great and can be important to have a catalog, but I think as a growing artist, it's also relevant to release on other people's labels.
Bueno, muchas gracias nuevamente. Un fuerte aplauso.
Gracias. Thank you.
Hacemos un pequeño break y seguimos con el último panel.